I've been wanting to make this video for quite a while, being held back because of finals week at school. But once I had the freedom to finally make this video, I got to it. I wanted to prove CrownSlayer's worth and did some math to figure out how worth it she really is. I wrote some Python code to simulate CrownSlayer's dodges and wrote an entire script where I talk math, analyze results, and give you the absolute truth of the matter. But the moment I started to edit the video, I realized that the entire video clashed with the very first line of the script and my intent behind the video. CrownSlayer is fun. Perhaps it's easy to get hooked into the discussion of objectivity, as it feels as though it's the only language that we can all understand. If I can prove something to you with math, then you have no choice but to believe me. But objectivity alone doesn't tell you the whole story. I wanted not just to express why I believe CrownSlayer is a great operator, but a really fun one at that. Numbers and stat checks and showcases can most certainly sell you on the quality of an operator, but it won't sell you on the experience of them. Arknights is a game after all. If you aren't having fun, then what's the point? That's not to say I think CrownSlayer doesn't objectively perform, because she does, and I have spreadsheets of data to prove that. Is she going to perform on the same level as Texas or Yato? No. Hell, she can't even perform on the same level as Gravel or Phantom in some contexts. Does that rid her of worth? Also no. It turns out she's pretty unique and is the only executor in the game that does what she does, and it's hard not to acknowledge those strong suits. CrownSlayer's main gimmick is being a saboteur executor, focusing on debuffing the enemy to give your frontline extra defensive support. Her talent normally reduces the hit rate of enemies at range by 20%, 25% with module. This effectively gives all of your operators a 25% chance to dodge attacks from enemies affected by CrownSlayer's talent. The main idea is that you throw CrownSlayer in the middle of a swarm of enemies that are attacking your allies and reduce their effective DPS by 25%. And although that on paper sounds awesome, the nature of dodging makes that not as consistent as it may seem. Luckily though, every single one of CrownSlayer's skills synergize or buff her talent nicely. CrownSlayer's S1 increases her attack by 100% and gives her a 50% arts and physical dodge. However, because of her talent, what she really has is a 62.5% arts and physical dodge. On average, this boosts CrownSlayer's effective HP to at least 4,800. If we are to be a bit more realistic, at the 70th percentile, CrownSlayer's effective HP sits at around 3,400 against lower attack enemies and 2,800 against higher attack enemies. This means around 70% of the time, CrownSlayer is going to have at least that much effective HP. CrownSlayer's S1 turns her into a fast redeploy dreadnought, a mini Skady in a way. She spots a healthy effective HP pool of nearly 3,500 and 1,280 attack. She doesn't perform as well as more defensive executors like S1 Phantom or Gravel, nor does she perform as well offensively as Texas or Yato, but what she is instead is a middle ground that can both tank hits and dish out good damage. For the 10 seconds that the skill is active, you essentially have a dreadnought. This makes CrownSlayer pretty good at picking off quite dangerous enemies, and due to the nature of her dodge, she can potentially perform quite well against enemies that would normally two-shot her. Her S1 is quite generic, but at the same time, it does something that technically no other executor does in being both incredibly offensive and defensive. The only exception to this would be Project Red, where CrownSlayer outperforms her in every regard. Does this power creep Red? Of course not. Red's talent is still integral to most of her usage, and CrownSlayer being an executor at her core makes her a very poor answer to enemies with higher defense. It is surely a fun skill, as her attack boost is enough to give you what you want out of a generic executor, and her dodge pushes her effective HP to a point where most enemies you typically would want to pick off will have at least some trouble dealing with her. CrownSlayer's S2 takes her S1 62.5% dodge and just gives it to everyone. The 2.5 times talent increase will boost her 25% hit rate reduction to 62.5, and since CrownSlayer becomes less likely to be targeted, operators you've already put down as tanks are still going to retain aggro. The skill also does damage, but that's more of an extra bonus on top of a nutty support skill. To reiterate, CrownSlayer gives all of your operators a 62.5% arts and physical dodge from enemies in her range, and given this over doubled CrownSlayer's effective HP with her S1, this will most surely do the same thing to your operators. My own tests have shown an increase in effective HP for Quartz and Kawara of over 10,000. Editing bloop here, I was wrong. Kawara doesn't gain an additional 10k effective HP with CrownSlayer's S2, she just gains 5k. The 10k number comes from tests I did that took into account defense calculations calculations, which I went over in the original script. The data I'm showing in this video is without defense calculations, and thus better represent arts damage interactions. I decided not to bring up the physical damage tests since they're obviously going to be better than the arts damage ones, and calculating effective HP with defense is weird. It would just be more words for no real gain. Just keep in mind that all the data and numbers that I'm showing are for arts damage, meaning that you can expect significantly higher numbers when dealing with physical damage for non-crushers. I'm kinda glad I made this mistake because now I can bring it up. So no, Cora doesn't gain 10k effective HP, she gains 5k effective HP in the context of arts damage. All operators will gain a significant effective HP boost against physical damage if they have defense. So I'm still lowballing the lowball. Get it? Got it? Good. There are two main ways you want to be using this skill, either against swarms of enemies or against big bosses. CrownSlayer will always perform more consistently against swarms, as her 62.5% dodge rate will more accurately function as a 62.5% damage reduction. The lower the incoming attack, the overall more consistent CrownSlayer's dodges will be. When using CrownSlayer to tank really heavy hitters, it's ideal that the operator you're supporting is at least able to tank one shot on its own. Operators with high base HP are already the kinds of operators you want to be using for dueling these kinds of enemies, but having to rely purely on CrownSlayer's dodges isn't ideal. There's a gigantic difference in performance for operators that can survive a single shot versus operators that can't, as being able to miss just a single shot allows for a significant increase in consistency, because now suddenly, the order where dodges and non-dodges happen isn't as strict. Although the duration of the skill is a measly 8 seconds, the skill itself still has a 30% general uptime because of CrownSlayer's quick redeploy, making sure that she will always be available before the next wave or a boss's skill. And personally, I'm a fan of increasing my operator's effective HP versus clip by over 100%. Frankly, I think that's pretty cool. The damage this skill provides isn't insignificant, but also isn't the reason why you're using this skill. Regardless, damage is damage. The skill synergizes with CrownSlayer's second talent quite well, which increases her damage output by 22% against enemies that haven't dealt damage to her yet. This means the explosion that she deals will most likely trigger this damage bonus against most enemies, as she's less likely to be targeted during the skill's duration. This boosts her S2's damage from 3200 to 3904, an increase of over 700 damage. Keep in mind though, CrownSlayer's S2 doesn't remove her block, so she is still vulnerable to melee attacks during the skill's uptime. This can be an upside or a downside depending upon the stage, either making her function as a diet gravel on top of her immense debuffing potential, or having her skill come to a premature end as she gets one shot by the enemy you are trying to stall out. If used smart, CrownSlayer's S2 can provide some insane defensive value. CrownSlayer's S3 is easily her most fun and interesting skill. She ceases to exist for 16 seconds, appearing once every 2 seconds to slice an enemy twice for 250% of her attack, stunning them for 4 seconds. To prevent this from being completely overpowered though, she has a limit on how quick she can attack the same enemy, only able to hit them once every 6 seconds. Her S3 also naturally synergizes with her second talent. She can't take damage during the skill, so she's always going to be doing 22% more damage. A single twin strike deals a total of 3,904 damage, the entire skill capable of over 31,000 damage, or 11,700 versus a single target. The main drawback of CrownSlayer's S3's damage output is how it interacts with defense. Since it's 2 attacks, it's doubly reduced by defense, and since her S2 is a damage boost rather than an attack boost, it doesn't help overcome that defense. But ultimately, the main point of CrownSlayer's S3 isn't the damage, it is most certainly the stun. A 4-second stun for a 6-second single target attack interval means CrownSlayer has a 66% stun uptime for up to 3 enemies in range, effectively reducing their DPS by at least 66%, since her stun could interrupt long attack animations. This skill, being double the duration of her S2, gives it a supreme uptime advantage at 47% for a similar DPS reduction. However, her S3 also doesn't do shit if the enemy is immune to stun, so it can limit her usage. Plus, her first talent is still active within the expanded range that her S3 takes up, meaning that during the short duration of her S3 stun downtime, it's still possible for the enemy to whiff. This isn't super reliable, but it's purely upside. CrownSlayer's S3 is really fun, since it's quite the unique take on her role. She's aimed at protecting your operators through sabotaging the enemy, and her uber consistent on-demand stun makes this incredibly so. Taking into account her redeploy, her stun has a 31% overall uptime, which is almost the same as her S2's general uptime. The skill even fucking synergizes with Hoderer. Literally, how can you not love it? Overall, CrownSlayer is really fucking fun. It's hard not to love her kit personally. Her role is super unique, being a supportive executor that doesn't downright replace the executors around her. I don't really give a shit that she doesn't delete enemies as fast as Yato or Texas, because to me that's not the point. If you judge operators purely on their ability to fulfill a boring generalist DPS role, then a lot of the nuance that makes Arknights fun gets lost. CrownSlayer's role isn't straightforward. She requires other operators for her to fully function. But in an era where the appeal of pure support operators is dying because of the allure of pure offense, kits like CrownSlayers get slept on for what they truly are. Outside of her S1, CrownSlayer isn't really meant to be doing that much damage. And even on her S1, a big selling point is her high dodge chance and survivability. Her S2 and her S3 are both heavily support-based, with both being incredibly balanced between each other and how it's handled. Both skills have pretty close DPS reductions in 62.5% and 66%. Both skills have about 30% effective uptime in their control effects. CrownSlayer's S2 is much more focused on general tanking support, capable of being applied to both single target and swarms, but makes CrownSlayer slightly more vulnerable in the process while also dealing less damage. Her S3 does more damage and has a better control effect, but is limited due to stun vulnerable enemies and only hitting a few at a time. I'm honestly really impressed at CrownSlayer's design. There's a lot of nuance to her kit and role. A lot of her skills perfectly play into that kit and her role as a supportive debuffer, while at the same time no skill being the strictly best generic option. So ultimately, the best part about CrownSlayer is that she's balanced. Yeah, of course she's not as good as the pushed and power creeped limited 6 stars, but that's a good thing. It's because she's a welfare that her kit is capable of being more creative and nuanced with how it handles her role. I agree that she isn't some brand new game-breaking 6 star, but that's the part of what makes her enjoyable. She doesn't immediately trump stages because of push stats or skills. Her strength is tied to the operators you bring to the stage and how good you are at using her, which, to be honest, should be how all operators are designed. I never felt like I was carried by bringing CrownSlayer, something I can't always say for other 6 stars, including Hoderer or Olpianus or Mjolnir or Ray. I always felt like my victories with CrownSlayer were deserved, and I feel that's the mark for great operator design. Remember, there are no bad operators. Thank you, and I love you all.